Here's a little bit of how you would do spreads with the stones. There are many different ways you can do the stones. Most of them are going to start with something as simple as the cast. And if we were doing, in this instance, we were doing a past, present, and future, based on the fact that amethyst, which dropped here, is the stone that represents the person you're doing the reading for or for yourself. The past, present, and future is you take the closest stone, which is jade for past, the next closest stone, which is unakite for present, and then the next closest stone, which is quartz, which would be the way forward. Notice I don't say the future, I say the way forward. And how you would interpret this is as it's a threefold spread of garnet, unakite, and quartz. Past, present, and future. Now you know from some of my readings I do this very often in combination with my pendulum. And one of the reasons why my pendulum is not a stone pendulum is so that I can use it with my stones. Because those lists I told you about of the powers and the challenges, when you hold your pendulum, first touching it, always touching it. Sorry about that, a little jiggly here today. And then you hold your pendulum to see if it moves widdershins or diacetyl, so does it move clockwise or counterclockwise. And right over now this garnet over top of it, I'm getting a very powerful counterclockwise widdershins move of my pendulum. That would mean that if I were interpreting that stone, I would look to see what were the challenges in the past that need to be overcome, that if they are not successfully overcome, are not relegated appropriately to the past. If my pendulum had given me a diacetyl circle, a clockwise circling, I would have known that there are certain strengths from the past that have brought me where I am. I do that for each of these to then determine, am I reading the challenges or the strengths in the moment? Past, present, future. So what is the thing of greatest import from the past that has impacted the most on the flow towards present? What is the thing that is currently, according to whether the pendulum said strength or challenge, impacting where a person is at the moment? If we look at the present as that pause of where they are at the moment, what is the positive thing about that in this line of flow, and what is the challenge? And then we look at the future. Once again, future not as a point in the future or something accomplished, but future as in the flow of, if this was your success or your challenge, and this is where you are now, almost always a result of this, this is where you are now, what is there about the relationship to this and this, whether it was shown as a challenge you have to overcome or a strength that will move you forward? That is the past, present, and future spread for the stones. Here's an interesting toss of these stones. I call this the gotcha. And since I threw the stones down as I said it, you probably didn't hear it. I said the gotcha reading. Gotcha reading is also a relationship to the flow and the movement in life. And the stone, again, that is closest to the amethyst, which is our keystone, is past. The next closest is garnet, which is the present, and then the milkstone is the forward. For the gotcha reading, we do a strength from the past that brought you forward, a strength in the present that in conjunction with that will bring you forward, and the challenge to the third phase, the flow forward, is the gotcha. We look at the negative of whatever this one is. Strength, strength, and what, even with these powers that we all have, that we've developed over time, what is it here that this is great, this build upon it, and this is the gotcha. The reverse of this stone will tell you what it is that you're going to need to overcome to keep the flow going forward. That's the gotcha, which is two correspondences of positives, a strength you have, a strength that you then have added, and then something that will stop them from coming to fruition if you don't deal with it. I call that the gotcha cast. Here's another form of cast. Whew, amethyst took a real roll on us that time. This uses the very specific correspondences I told you about. The stone closest will be for the person. The next closest stone will be for the person in relationship to community. And the third stone, oh, I love it when jade falls for spirituality, will be about spirituality. So if you were doing this reading, once again, so many of these readings are threefold. That's just the way they've come for me. First stone would be the powers and the challenges. You can read both if you'd like for the person, or you can use the pendulum of the person individually on their own. The second stone, the challenges and powers of that person in relation to others. And the third would be the challenge and the powers of who they are spiritually, which is interesting when you get jade, because jade doesn't have a lot of reverse when it comes to spirituality. So you have at this point had the past, present, and future. You had the gotcha, the power challenge, coming up a brick wall cast, and now you have the individual in relation to others and the spiritual aspects of the individual. And before I stop showing you variations on this, because the truth is you can design these. Some of these were given to me as examples. Some of them I mimicked card spreads or the way runes were cast, and some I totally invented, and the fun ones are the one that you invented. So I'm not going to do too many of these because I want you to be able to come up with different ways you might do it yourself. If you play with the stones, I would love to know some of the ways you have then decided to do your castings, some of the meanings you have given your castings. I would love for you to be able to explain that to me and tell me a little bit about it. What I'm doing now as I'm talking is I am setting up elemental quarters for two ways I'm going to show you that we do elemental readings for the stones. We have north, we have east, south, and west. There's a couple of ways to do elemental readings when it comes to the stone. The first thing is you can do something as simple as pick whichever stone is closest to each of the elements for somebody. So we would have obsidian, cornelian, jade, and snowy quartz would be the way that one would go. And if you are an elemental, which as I am, these are great fun because you can then interpret the powers or the challenges of each of these stones in relationship to the element. So we're getting another level of sophistication here. It's according to how much affinity you have and study you have of the elements. I love doing elemental readings. Again, you can automatically do both powers and challenges, or you can use your pendulum to decide which call you will make for each one. When I do this kind of casting, once I have the stones moved to their elements, and if you ever are in doubt, like, oh, something's so close I can't tell which stone is, just grab one and move it. Your instinct will be right. I will often, when I'm doing this kind of elemental reading, because it could get, well, it could just get too lengthy if you didn't do something. If you looked at each of those four stones in relationship to the element and their powers and their challenges, and 2 hours later maybe you've gotten the reading done, what I do is I center my pendulum and I let it decide whether the reading will be, and in this case, very powerfully, it decided it wanted to be clockwise. So it's a diacetyl reading, which means I would interpret this then for the powers of each of those stones, and especially as they relate to the element they fell closest to. That is one way of doing an elemental reading. A very simplistic way of doing an elemental reading is to first drop the stone to see what the keystone is. So if it were amethyst for this particular individual we were doing, we would do a single stone reading. Oh, I like this. And you would determine by the location of the stone that was the keystone, the most powerful element that will have influence on that. Interesting, amethyst is almost center here. It's a little bit towards fire from that. An elemental which will be able to use the powers and the challenges of amethyst in its many different correspondences to come up with an entire story that relates amethyst to being just about center, which is a balance of all the elements, and a little bit closer towards air. That's a single stone reading for the elements. And I will show you one more. This is something which my teacher taught me, which was called the cross. And I find this a fascinating one that I very often will come up with great insights for myself. The cast is done in the middle of the elements, and you then look at the stones in front of you, and what you're looking for is, here's our amethyst, if you can't see it. We're looking for the 3 stones that make a line this way, including the amethyst, and the 3 stones that do a line this way, including the amethyst. And the easiest way to do this one is just to remove the stones that don't fall in that path. So here's what we would end up with for what my teacher called the cross. Now this can be a very complicated reading, and it's a wonderful one to do for meditation for yourself. This particular one, hello Ernie, you were sleeping under the table, you just woke up? This particular one, the power of it is you are looking at earth and fire. They are the natural elemental competitors and balance to each other. They also have their ways they work together well and the ways they don't work together well. You're talking about the line from earth to fire. And then we're going to interpret the stones that fall in that line. So using this, the amethyst as our center point in all of these, we have the obsidian is closer to earth and the jade is closest to fire. And we would actually be doing a divination, which is, it is a bit sophisticated. I just want to show you how this can get and how you can have a wonderfully detailed and involved meditation on the movement, the elemental movement, the balancing between earth and fire. Which what you are doing then is you are aligning the obsidian to earth, the jade to fire. So you already have 2 different things to keep in mind there. Power of fire, power of earth. Obsidian characteristics that are earthly, jade characteristics that are fire, and amethyst characteristics as the great balancer of those. It's a way of bringing yourself back to a sense of elemental balancing. And then you do the cross balancing. In this case we have snowy quartz, which is closest to air, which I love that combination, and we have smoky quartz, which is closest to water. So again, you would then look for alignments of the snowy quartz to air, alignments of the smoky quartz to water, and a sense of how amethyst powers can balance this all into center. It's the balancing of these opposites into one place. That's a cross. That one is one I often do for meditations for myself, when I want to cast a circle and spend time in circle and do a form of divination for myself. Find that one very powerful. It works if you're very elementally affiliated and know your elements very well and the aspects of the elements. And let's not forget at the most simplistic level that knowing our one stone well, to draw a stone out of your bag in the morning, to cast your stones to see which one comes closest to you. Problem by putting them in a bag is you get to know your stones well, and you may even unconsciously be pulling a particular stone. So if you cast your stones to either decide what one lies closest, if you do a quick elemental setup like this, cast your stones and see ahead of time what your stone of affinity falls closest to. Think about the powers of your stone in relationship to that element for the day. That's a good single stone reading. It's also just simply The stone alone. Pulling a stone from your bag. Meditating on its strengths and its challenges. What it might be for the day for you, or for somebody you're doing a reading for, that you want to keep it to that simplistic level. What would this stone mean to me today, in the sense of my personal strengths and challenges? What would this stone mean to me today, in the sense of my personal strengths and challenges, when it comes to my relationship with those I love and those I run into at work, in my daily life, in my community? Or what might this stone represent to me today regarding challenges and strengths on my spiritual path? It can be as simple as that. Let me know if you have any questions. I would love to know what kind of casts, what kind of draws, what kinds of spreads you design for yourself. Work backwards from the kinds of things you want to be able to answer for yourself or for others, and determine a pattern, a spread that feels like it gives you information. Try it, see what happens. Whatever you do, write it down, collect those spreads for yourself, because you will forget all the many spreads you come up with over time. Let your own wisdom guide you in creating your correspondences and the spreads you would choose to use. And please don't think that you are an encyclopedia. Open your correspondences up, run your fingers over it, ponder it, see what leaps out at you. You are always dealing with a long list of correspondences. If I were looking at what would amethyst be in the way of strengths for me today, there's probably 40 things in my list of correspondences. What would I do? One will leap out. And that's where you leave it. You do not overanalyze it. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I look forward to hearing from you if this is something that you try, or even if it's something you've had experience with, that you can tell me a little bit about what you do differently. I wish you blessings of the stones, my friends. Mary Park.